Merry meet! Beltane is the fire festival of the Celts with connections to sexuality, sensuality, fertility, abundance, and creativity. But there's so much more to this holiday. And while it's traditionally celebrated on May 1st, in actuality it's a cross-quarter day, which means that its date changes year to year. What's more, its energy exists as much longer than just a single day, and so it makes a lot more sense to talk about Beltane, like all the Sabbats, as a season rather than just one specific day. So we are going to talk all about this and the thinning of the veils in tonight's episode. So merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and I'm here tonight talking all about Beltane. So saying hi to those who are joining us. And if you would like to leave any questions or comments in the chat, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. Hi, Glenda. There's some people joining us now. And if you like the video, you can leave a heart at any time or a thumbs up, and it just helps this video get into the feed of other people and more viewers. All right, so I am going to start by giving a little background on Beltane. We'll talk about the thinning veils. We'll talk about different Beltane activities. And then I'll give you some ideas of how you could celebrate at home. Because like I said, it's a season. We've still got plenty of time to celebrate. Hi, Danielle and Misty. A lot of you joining. All right, happy Beltane, everybody. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Beltane is a fire festival of the Celts, and its name may originate from the sun god Bel, sometimes called Belanos, and it may also refer to the bale fire that our ancestors in Europe would jump over around this time of year in certain parts of Europe. The cattle would be driven in between these bale fires, and it was thought to purify the herd and actually bring prosperity to the people. And in the story of the Wheel of the Year, this is a time when the sun god is in his prime and he has become the green man. He reaches his sexual maturity, and when he transforms into the green man, he comes into union with the goddess in her maiden form. So our ancestors believed that the fertility of the land was tied to certain rites and certain rituals that the people did, and thought that it was tied to this union between the god and the goddess energies. So this union we call the sacred marriage would be enacted by the people, usually physically in the old days. Today, more symbolically. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this representation called the Hieros Gamos is the great rite. Now, it could be performed by any couple, but it was usually performed by two people in the village or the tribe who might have had higher standing. It's not unusual for it to be done between the king and a representation of the goddess. So if you have read the book Mist of Avalon or watched the mini-series, came out in like the late 90s or early 2000s, there is this scene where Arthur, as the new king, he has to consummate his relationship with the land, with the goddess. And so they choose a maiden. She comes from the Isle of Avalon, and unknowing to Arthur or the maiden, Morgaine, they are brother and sister, and they end up having sex in this very memorable scene. So if you have not read that book, I highly recommend it. It is one of the greatest books, and it really does, it's fiction, but it really does go into a lot of these pagan customs, and you actually can learn a lot from it. Now, in this respect, the balefires also can serve a purpose where couples would jump over the balefires, often hand in hand, and this would ensure their own fertility. And then in a more general concept, this would ensure the fertility of the land as a whole. Now today, as I mentioned, the sacred marriage is most often done symbolically. I have heard that there are a few places where they still do it physically. Obviously, there's consent and there's issues today that they did not really adhere to back then. But most of the time people do it symbolically, and when it's done symbolically, it's usually a cauldron or a chalice to represent the womb of the goddess, and then people would generally use an athame or some kind of a knife to represent the male, the phallus of the god. And so you take the athame and you bring it down into the chalice, and this will be the symbolic great rite. Now, the maypole is also a symbolic version of this, the maypole itself representing the phallus of the god, and the earth representing the divine feminine. So when the maypole is put into the earth, it's thought to fertilize the land, and then people dance around it. And very few people actually realize that origin, especially if they're not pagan or pagan friendly themselves. And so it is no wonder that both Samhain and Beltane are probably the two most controversial of all the pagan Sabbats from an outside perspective. And I think that these two, they represent very opposite energies, but yet similar energies that are feared by the majority of, well, let's say Christians, sometimes other Abrahamic religions, but mainly from the Christian religion. And no wonder these two energies are sex and death, and silly muggles to fear such things. But that kind of explains why these are the two most controversial of the Sabbats. Now, this does lead us to an important point about the opposite energy of Sabbats on the wheel. So Beltane and Samhain exist at 180 degrees away from each other. And so there are many similarities between their energies that we don't often think about. We think about them as being very polar opposite, and yes, they are. Sex, which brings in the regeneration of the tribe, and death, which takes a member away from it. But yet, at both Beltane and Samhain, we have a thinning of the veils. So at Beltane, this thinning occurs, and it allows for more souls to enter. So you just have to look around you in nature, and you'll see there are more souls entering all the time, whether from the plant world or from the animal world. And at Samhain, the veils thin in order to allow for more of an exit of the souls. Now, at Beltane, these veils will make it much easier for us to see the Fae folk, to see the elementals and other nature spirits. So it's not unusual to have encounters with them, or at least to sense them. In our own house, we call this time of year the fairy season. And it is not unusual for the cats to just stare into nothing or chase things. Just last night, baby Corey was just staring at something in against the wall for an endless amount of time, it seemed. Now, this energy generally starts around mid-April. We start to feel it then, and it will last through midsummer. So in the story of the Wheel of the Year, the god and the goddess, they consummate their marriage, and she becomes pregnant, and then life is renewed. So at Samhain, the goddess then prepares to descend into the underworld as she mourns the loss of her partner or consort. So he, of course, will be reborn again at Yule as the sun god, and the cycle starts all over again, and then he reaches maturity at Beltane. It's often useful for us to look at the Sabbats in these opposite ways. And we can learn a lot by looking at the two that are polar opposite from each other and comparing and contrasting them. Now, it's also, I think, worth mentioning the timing of Beltane. Traditionally, it's celebrated on May 1st, and many people will call it May Day, especially out in the non-magical world. But really, Beltane is a cross-quarter day, which that means it is the midpoint between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. Now, those dates change every year just by a few days on either side, but what that means is that Beltane changes every year as well. That midpoint changes every year. So typically, astrological Beltane will fall sometime between the 4th of May and the 7th. I believe I've seen it as late as the 8th once. This year, it falls on May 5th. Now, what's interesting about May 5th, and I'll talk more about this at the end of the episode, but it coincides with a full moon and with a penumbral eclipse. So we have a very amplified energy taking place this Friday night. And not only that, we have the solar cycles aligning with the lunar cycle. So what that means is we have the solar cycle in its waxing phase as it's waxing up to its very peak at Litha. And we also have the lunar cycle approaching its very peak here on the 5th, on the full moon. So whenever Sabbats line up with lunar cycles in that way, they amplify that energy. Now that doesn't mean that when they don't line up, it's bad. It just means when they do line up, it's even better. So honestly, you really couldn't get much better energy than we're going to have on the 5th. Everything's very much aligned, with the exception of our Mercury in retrograde, but we're all managing with that. I hope. This one's been a little bit harder, though. I've been hearing from people. So at the same time, we can view Beltane just like any Sabbath. We can view it when we view it from an energetic point of view. What we notice is that it's not just that energy that hits on that specific day. And in some traditions, people consider it more of a season. In my own tradition, we consider it a seasonal energy, not just the singular day. Now, personally, I feel that celebrating in that way or experiencing the energy in that way creates a much deeper connection to the solar cycle in a way that we don't really experience when we just kind of wait for each of those 8 Sabbats, celebrate on that one day, and then sort of move on. If we instead extend the seasonal energy out, we're constantly in the energy of the solar cycle, the energy which is the energy of the land. See, the lunar cycle is the energy of the goddess and our emotions and that flowing energy, but that solar energy is actually that natural energy around us. So when we celebrate Beltane in this way, or any of the Sabbats, we are in that, we're immersed in that energy. So I see people all the time worried that if they've missed that actual Sabbath date. And in fact, I saw a friend just yesterday or last night, she posted a Beltane post and said, "Oh, I know I'm late." But the actual reality of it, in my opinion, is that Beltane hasn't even arrived yet. It's on the 5th. We are not even there yet. So if you haven't celebrated yet, don't worry. You got plenty of time. And if you've already celebrated on the 1st, well, great. You hit it as the energy was starting to rise up, and you can still continue on into the season. So we have about 4 weeks to go where we're going to be feeling that energy before it starts to transition into Litha energy. So knowing that we have all of that time, what could we do? Well, here are some ideas for Beltane. All right. So first off, you could build a bale fire. Now, bale fires were generally built from bales of hay. And so unless you live out in a place where you have bales of hay, I know that some of you do, but if you don't, you can build this just in your yard. Obviously have a place that's contained. Honestly, I have it was actually called the Celestial Cauldron, and it's a very large like fire pit. I think I paid $100 for it at Home Depot or something a few years ago, and it makes a very great space to put wood in and then burn it. So you could make a bale fire that way. That's generally what I do every year. Now you can then leap over that Beltane fire if you'd like, and I do say use caution, be careful. And honestly, there's like 2 reasons for that. Number one, it's fire, and so if you're wearing like a long skirt or something, just be careful. You don't want to catch yourself on fire, but at the same time, also be cautious because traditionally jumping over the balefire was about fertility. So if you are not hoping to become physically pregnant or fertile, then you would want to kind of send that intention out into the universe that you're jumping over the balefire, maybe for the land or for some other type of fertility or abundance in your life. So you just want to be a little careful when we're using those traditional ways of celebrating, and just kind of make sure our intentions are clear. Now, you could make flower crowns. This is something that we do as children. I think it's a great way to really bring your inner child into the ritual. You can make these out of artificial flowers. So go to Michael's. They have so many flowers right now that you could choose from. And that way, when you make your crown, you could use it every Beltane. But you could also make it out of real flowers. I've done that as well. You can use daisies or any wildflowers that you have in the yard. And if you're interested in that, there are lots of tutorials online that teach you how to make a flower crown. But it's pretty self-explanatory and easy. And but definitely look that up if you're interested. Now, you can do a plant or a flower meditation. So we're really liking to connect with those like nature spirits, the elementals right now. Connecting with the flowers and the plants is such a great way to do this. Several years ago at PantheaCon, I had such a fortunate experience. I got to go there. I've been there a couple times. And Christopher Penczak was there, and he led a flower meditation. I think it was actually a plant meditation. But I ended up choosing strawberry. You just kind of let your mind choose the plant that you will meditate, and you sort of become that plant. So it can be a really neat way to commune with a plant. And I will be doing a meditation like that in our Shadow Seekers membership at some point. So those of you who are members, you'll get to experience that. And those who aren't members, we're going to be opening up in a little bit. So you might be interested in joining us. So besides plant meditation, you can build a maypole or a mini maypole. Now, we have built a maypole once. We did that one Beltane several years ago, and we got PVC pipe. So you get enough PVC pipe. It needs to be pretty tall, like, I don't know, I would say like about 8 feet tall. And you have to be able to anchor it into the ground, and then you'll tie or secure ribbons to the top of it. And if you're going to do that and then go around, dance around the maypole, you'll need several people to do it. It's not something you can do as a solitary, unfortunately, but you can get some friends. It can be a neat way to celebrate Beltane. Now, you can also build a mini maypole. Now, we made this mini maypole in our maypole ritual last year, our coven did, because we were all online. And so you just get a stick and then you tie some ribbons around it like that. And inside, I placed acorns, like different symbols of fertility. There's some nuts in here, flowers. We have some dirt from the garden. And you could put stones in here. You can really get very creative. And honestly, like, it's so neat because the flowers dried out, and I just have kept this since last Beltane. So really, really neat idea for the solitaries or those who don't have a lot of space for a maypole or just want to have this nice little maypole in your house. So that is an idea. As far as spell work, some good intentions for Beltane would be sexuality and sensuality. Sex magic is very good at this time of year. Love magic, fertility magic, creativity, and it's also a very good time for setting the intention of abundance and prosperity. Of course, our true abundance and prosperity holiday is Lunaza, which takes place near August 1st. But this to me is sort of the time when we're planting the seeds for what we will harvest later on in the year. Now, you can also perform divination at Beltane. Very good to perform divination at this time. Because the veils are as thin as they are, it makes divination a little bit easier. You can perform any kind you want. And that could be pendulum, it could be your tarot cards, scrying, anything you'd like, runes. Hand fasting is another great activity for Beltane. So like I mentioned, this is a seasonal energy, and really that kind of energy for hand fasting will extend all the way through Litha, so well into July. So if you are wanting to get hand fasted to your partner, this is a great time to do it. And I would recommend a Friday or a Sunday, but usually not Saturday. I talked about that in an episode a few weeks ago about the timing of the days of the week. Saturday, even though it's a traditional day to get married or hand fasted on, is energetically ruled by Saturn, not really great for that kind of thing. So Friday or Sunday from now until middle of July, great time for that. Now, you can also leave offerings for the fairy folk, flowers, fruit. They love shiny things like keys. And so I would be cautious with your own keys during fairy season. Like I mentioned earlier, we consider fairy season to be like about mid-April into all the way through June. And so I always make sure I put my keys in a place where I know where they are. Otherwise, it's not unusual for the fairies to move them, and they always return them, but I can't find them for a while. Also, jewelry, like things that you place down, make sure you know where everything is. But you can very much appease the fairies by making a fairy jar where you just put a little tiny, like, get like a little baby food jar. It doesn't have to be very large, and put shiny things like coins and things in there. And the fairies tend to like that. So the only thing you want to be careful about, iron and steel, not good. Traditionally, it's been thought that those are ways to combat the fairies. So you don't really want to be using that if you're trying to, appease them and just be friendly with them. But a lot of jewelry, things like that, little trinkets, they seem to like. I've found that mine here, despite the fact we live 15 miles from the ocean or so, 20 miles, they like ocean items. Seashells and sand is something that they seem to like. So I always bring them offerings back from the beach. You can also take a Beltane ritual bath with flowers or essential oils. That can be a really nice way to pamper yourself. I really feel that as we move in, start to transition into the summer, is a really nice time to just treat yourself well, a great time for self love and self care, and really making those priorities. Now, some ritual ideas I'm just going to share a few things that our coven has done in the past that we've really enjoyed. So we did the ritual one Beltane where we did the maypole, and we decided we want to do something different the next year. So but we wanted to use ribbons. So we decided to spin a web, and we were actually working with the fates during that ritual. And so this was such a neat ritual. We marked a large circle in my backyard, and we had all the coven members stand along the edge of the circle. And then one person started. They had you have to have like a spool of either thread, not thread, I would say like yarn, something that's a little bit thick ribbon, and that person will basically, you could throw it or you could bring it to the person across from you, someone across from you in the circle, and then they bring it to someone across on the other side, and eventually you've woven this web, which is really neat. And then you can set an intention of something that you want to catch in the web. And so everybody would set a different intention that they wanted to draw in. So really neat idea if you have some people that you can do that with. Unfortunately, can't do that solitary, but neat idea. As I mentioned earlier, symbolic great rite. We have almost always done some version of a symbolic great rite in our rituals, which is very simple. You can actually find there's a version of a poem that goes really well with it, and if you just Google symbolic great rite, you will find versions of this poem, and you just can recite it, and then at some point it tells you to put the athame down into the cauldron or the chalice, and this is your symbolic consummation, the god consummating with the goddess, and just kind of brings in that energy, supports the energy of the season. Another ritual, we did charging coins for fertility and abundance. That was a neat ritual where we had a dish of water. We were actually working with Lakshmi at that ritual, who is a goddess who has water connections and connections to the sacral chakra. And we had people charge coins with an intention for some kind of abundance or fertility they wanted in their lives. And then we placed them in this dish of water. And then eventually, one of the coven sisters took the entire dish home, and she put it in her fountain at home where it would just be there forever. So it's something you could do with a group, but you could also definitely do something like that alone if you're solitary. Another thing that we have done in the past is blessing and planting seeds. Sometimes we do that at Ostara, but we also have done it at Beltane, and you can then charge your seeds with any intention you want. And then as you tend to that plant and it grows, your intention grows, the energy goes out to the universe. And fire meditation is also a really nice ritual idea. We've done that before. And it's similar to candle gazing, but you would use like a balefire or a fire that perhaps you'd build in your fire pit, or in a like I got that celestial cauldron a couple years ago. You can also build it in a small cauldron if you have one too. and then just kind of stare into the fire and let what comes to you come to you. And speaking of the fire, you can actually burn the 9 sacred woods in the fire. Now, this is an idea that many people, I've seen many people talk about. I have never done it before. I've always wanted to. In order to do it, you have to have some preparation. So it might not work for this year, but if you're interested in it, you could maybe consider it for another year, or maybe you can acquire these things before the end of the Beltane season. But the 9 sacred woods to the Celts were alder, ash, birch, hawthorn, hazel, holly, oak, rowan, and willow. So you'd have to acquire all 9 of these woods, and then they were traditionally what the Beltane fire was made of. Each one has a symbolic meaning, so you can Google that and find out what all the meanings are if you're interested in them. But it is also possible if you're not able to acquire all 9, you could try to get apple or fir or grapevine can work as a replacement if you can't find some of those woods. So that's a neat idea. I've definitely one that's on my list of things that I'd like to do eventually. Now, as far as altar ideas go, you can put flowers and candles on your altar, crystals, all of those kind of generic items can all anything that would be general to any Sabbath can go there. But other items that really are symbolic of the season would be cauldrons or chalices or athames, kind of symbols of that union of the god and the goddess. Lots of candles. It is a fire festival. The colors are typically green and white, though honestly, because it's a fire festival, I think that red and oranges also work really well here. Um, and deity archetypes that you could work with, if you work with deity in your practice, are the fire god, the sun god, the green god, or the maiden goddess. And then as individual deities, you could think about working with Bel, who is probably what the holiday is named after. At least that's one speculation on it. Pan, Jack in the Green, Apollo is the sun god. Dionysius and Bacchus are very good because they bring in that masculine sexual energy. Aphrodite as the counterpart. Venus and Balder would be a nice one as well. But this list is not exhaustive by any means. So I am going to, before I get into the Q&A, I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit about our own ritual that we're doing this year and invite you to it if you're not already aware that we're doing this. So we are actually going to be working with Hecate at this ritual, which is a little unusual, I think. I don't see a lot of people doing that, though she does have connections to Beltane, and there are actually connections to fertility, even though she is usually typically called in her crone aspect. But we are honoring her because we're really trying to lean heavily into that energy across the wheel, that connection to Samhain. And we called Hecate at Samhain, we called her into the crossroads where she helped us face an aspect of our shadow selves. And I think some of you were probably at that ritual. So we decided that we wanted to work with her again in this time in her version Keeper of the Keys. And so during this ritual, we are going to take advantage of those thin veils. So those thin veils that are happening now, it's not just about the fairy folk. We debated about this, whether we should do a fairy ritual at Beltane. We've decided to hold off, and we think we may be doing it for Litha instead. But these thin veils also allow us to pass through doorways or spaces in our own consciousness. And it's much easier for us to slip in and out of these doorways and portals when the veils are thin. So during this ritual, and not only that, because what I mentioned earlier, it's a full moon and that penumbral eclipse. Now, eclipses always add extra energy to the rituals or to any working you're doing at that time. Sometimes that energy is really, really chaotic, but at a penumbral eclipse, it's a version of an eclipse that doesn't tend to increase the chaos. And what it does, though, is it brings us into a space where we're going to be more receptive and open. This is going to allow us to pass through the veils even easier, and it's already easier to do it because it's Beltane. So this is just a great time to try to cross through the veils. So what we are doing is we are going to explore this inner landscape where we're going to search for 5 doorways. One doorway to the ancestral realm will begin this kind of ritual energy, and we'll receive messages there. And then we're going to explore our past a past version of ourselves or our inner child, a future version of ourselves, and a parallel version of ourselves, which is a version that made a different choice or a different decision at some point in our lives, which changed the trajectory of its path. And then at the end, we will receive a message from the higher self. So we're really, really excited about this ritual. Very unusual for Beltane and very unusual, different than what we normally do. So if you would like to join us, you can get a ticket by a donation of any amount, and I'll put a link below this video where you can get your ticket if you'd like. That ritual is taking place this Friday, 5/5 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. That's 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you are in Shadow Seekers or a Shadow Seeker member, your tickets are already complimentary. So you guys all already have tickets. And there is a replay for everyone who has a ticket. So if you don't have one yet and you're not a member of Shadow Seekers, get yours now. We'd really love for you to join us. All right, so I am going to move into the Q&A, and I've got some more people coming in. Hi, Carla and Jen. All right, so I've got some questions that some people have given me. I actually have a question from Danielle and from Jen from a couple weeks ago that I didn't see in time. So I'm gonna answer those. And then and you can put any other questions in here if you'd like. And Danielle said that she has been buying little fae homes for her gazebo, and she's going to try to make them a maple. Yes, I know. So yeah, make them a little maple. It'll be fun. It's a good idea. I didn't think I should go make mine one too. They have like a little doorway in the tree in the front yard. So. All right, so I've got some questions. So anybody who's here, if you have other questions, put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and answer a few questions. All right, so Jen was asking about ancestors, and she said she's so curious to find out if they're around. She said, "How do I connect, and what do I do for offerings, etc." Okay, so the first thing I would suggest is to build an ancestral altar. So sometimes we think of this as being a Samhain activity, and yes, we do it at Samhain. Our coven makes one every Samhain. But you absolutely can have an ancestral altar at any time of the year. And honestly, because we are 180 degrees off of Samhain, I've been talking about those thin veils. It's a great time for you to build an ancestor altar. So it doesn't have to be a big space. You can actually get a table for it, and you can make one. Or I think the tops of bookshelves is an awesome way to make an altar. You don't even have to put a cloth over it, but you can if you want. And great things for an ancestral altar are photos, mementos, favorite foods. So if you are trying to connect with an ancestor that you actually knew when they were alive, you'll actually have a better idea of what they like, their foods that they might have liked while they were living. You will probably have pictures of them. You might have mementos that you could place on the altar. If you're trying to connect to an ancestor that you have never physically met, perhaps you still know things about them because you've been told that. Or if it's someone further back that no one around you really knew, you could always ask them what they want. And then listen for the first thing that comes into your mind, or look for a sign, and just trust your intuition that this is a message that's coming from them. So this is how I found out that the fairies liked the sand. It's strange. Why would they like beach sand? But it was just I asked what they wanted, and that's what they said. And so I'm not going to question it. So I bring them sand back every month for my full moon ritual. We can try that with the ancestors, see what they say, and then kind of go with that. And what I would do then, so the ancestral altar is like a really great way to start. It anchors in the connection, and it basically tells them, look, I'm open and I'm ready, and I would like to communicate. I'd like to have contact. And then from there, you'll probably want to find some kind of a method to communicate. So sometimes it can be as simple as you build the altar, it starts off the energy, and then from there, you might start to have visitations in dreams, you might have messages, you might see synchronicities that you are very sure are coming from them. If you want something more physical, a pendulum's always a great way to start. When you're first starting, it's usually yes and no. You can at least ask yes and no questions, but you can get more complex into that. And there are boards that you can. And Jen, I I think you make the boards for your pendulum anyway. So but for those who don't know much about the pendulum, you can get boards where you can get more answers than simply just yes and no. So, so that's an idea. Another idea for contacting and communicating is automatic writing. Now, automatic writing is, I will actually be doing an episode on that soon. It's a method that I have used since I was a teenager. I, for some reason, was able to pick it up very easily. But it is something that I don't want to necessarily say you need to use caution with, but you have to know how to be clear with your intentions, because if you're pretty receptive and you open yourself up as a channel, because that's essentially what automatic writing is doing, you just kind of go to channel, then you typically will have a lot of different spirits come in, and sometimes they're not honest with who they are. So I'm going to be doing a whole episode on it to teach you guys what I know about automatic writing. But that is a neat way to try to contact ancestors, because you can be very clear: I would like to contact an ancestor of mine, or I'd like to contact a specific ancestor. And we will be doing more ancestral work in the membership as we get closer to Samhain. We're going to revisit some ancestral work. And also at our Beltane ritual, like I mentioned, that could be like a starting point, and you can see what comes up for you at that beginning of the ritual when we go to the ancestral realm. So those are some ideas. And so I would say just kind of like start with the altar, and then do the ritual and see what starts coming up for you, and then they will likely tell you other things that will then start you, on different paths, knowing what to do. They might tell you different ways to contact them. So just be kind of open to that. Okay, and you said you were trying to contact your 10-time great grandmother. Okay, so someone quite far back, accused of being a witch in Salem, so you don't know much about her personally. Yeah, so what I would do, I think that you would probably best be served by just asking if there's anything, that's your intention. So you would build your ancestral altar. You could make it more of a generic one and just put food offerings. Something that people typically would leave would be like oranges, fruit, different things like that, flowers. And then this is just, like I said, like a contact point. So it's saying, I would like to connect. And then just listen. You can ask, what would she like? Does she have anything to say to you? But also see what comes up for you in the ritual, in that Beltane ritual, and see what comes up. Okay, and then Elizabeth said the Fae seem to love wind chimes. Yeah, year round. Yeah, exactly. They love like the sound, that tinkling sound and everything. Yeah. Okay, so I have I have actually two questions from Danielle, because I have one from 2 weeks ago, and then I have another one from today. And if anybody else left questions, I usually don't see them if they left like within like 30 minutes of the live. I usually don't see them, but I always will get back to them at the next time. So Danielle was asking about finding time when life gets busy, especially when there are rituals and celebrations that she wants to be a part of. So I have like kind of a two-part answer to this. So if you're trying to find just a way, like I know, like in my own life, it's very busy. I work a full-time job and run a full-time business that are like separate from each other. And it's a means to an end right now until I can just transition fully into the business. But it's very, very, very busy. So finding just like bite-sized practices that you can do, and you can do them regularly, which I would say, like, I try to do it every day, if not, most days. Finding these bite-sized practices when you're pressed for time can really help. So next week, I am going to be doing an episode that is going to share a lot of practices that you could use. The episode is, I'll talk a little bit about it at the very end, but I think it will give you some ideas. But just off the top of my head, I would look for like 5 minutes of time. 5 to 10 minutes of time is really all you need, and it can be just as simple as like drawing cards on this one day, fire gazing for 5 minutes on the next day. What else? 5 minutes of breath work on the third day. And you can alternate these, or you can do the same thing every day, but you really just need the 5 minutes. And if you can do that 5 to 10 minutes, you will see a big change, even though it doesn't feel like a lot in like the perfectionist in me wants to do like my 2 hours of like meditation and yoga and spiritual practices every night. And unfortunately, at this moment, I don't have the time for that. So cutting it into these small little pieces has helped me a lot. Now, I have the feeling though that your question might have been more about like um, things that are longer. So, for example, like rituals that you want to go to that are longer and not really knowing how to find the time for that. So I actually have I have an answer for that too. So um, fortunately, there are places that have replays. That's why replays are really important to me, to make sure that people have access to the replays, and our membership and all anybody who buys tickets to our rituals always gets that replay so they can do it in their own time. I'm somebody who absolutely needs replays. My life is too crazy to sometimes be doing things, going to things live all the time. But here's an interesting thought that I came across a few months ago, and I did this, even though it seemed crazy to me, but I tried this and it seemed to work. So I'm going to offer this and just see what happens. So I have this deck of cards. I've talked about it before, and it's a oracle card deck about angelic realms. And I've never really been somebody big into the angelic realms, mainly because I had a huge falling out with the church, and so I just got some like issues to work on with that. But this deck came as part of my Hay House subscription box. And at first I was like, oh my God, like what about this deck? So I started using it. It was like the best deck ever. It's so accurate, I can't even believe it. But one of the cards I pulled one day, it said, the crazy thing is too, is it's like it's speaking to me. Even when I don't know that this is what I need to hear, I'm like, after I read it, I'm like, it's exactly what I needed to hear. So this one day, it's talking about time. And it says that the angels say, if you need more time, just tell me to slow down time. I can do that. So at first I was like, come on. And I'm a science teacher, but I'm also a witch. And so I know that there are ways that, when we slip in and out of ritual, we're not in time and we're not in present time and space. But the card kept coming up. And so one day I was like, you know what? I actually need time to slow down. I have too much to do and I'm not able to get it done. I was staying up till 6 or 7 in the morning getting things done. I'd sleep a few hours and then I'd be up teaching kids in the morning. And so I did this. So I put the intention out. Just slow down time. Yeah, I'd like you to slow down time. And I can't tell you that anything particularly noticeable happened, but all of a sudden I could get my work done and it was strange. So I don't know if I sped up or time slowed down or I became more efficient, but somehow putting that intention out, all of a sudden there was more time. And now I can go to bed earlier and I'm still getting things done and I actually have time to spare a little bit, a little bit. But try it and see what happens. Just do it with like kind of curiosity. That's how I did it. Just curiosity. Suspend your disbelief for a moment and just see what happens. Okay, I do have one more question from Danielle, and if anybody else has any in the, put them in the chat. So Danielle was talking, this is a good question too. So she said that when she closes her eyes in the very early morning hours, she sees visions. Mostly it's animals trying to communicate with her. She said her struggle though is that there are so many trying to communicate, I can't hear them all at once. Can I say one at a time? And I'd love to learn more about animal communication so I can strengthen what I've got. Okay, so yes, you absolutely can say one at a time. And I don't know if you were around when we did an episode like several months ago where someone asked a similar question. It wasn't about animal communication, it was more about like they had a lot of guides and spirits that were talking to them. And they asked a very similar question, could you say one at a time? And you absolutely can. And the thing about animal energy especially is that it's closer to childlike energy sometimes, and so when they find somebody who is like can hear them, they all want to talk. I'm sure that you notice that, right? And so you absolutely can tell them yes one at a time. But another technique that you can try is you can make an intention to ever so slightly close your third eye or your crown, or if it's a different chakra where you think is channeling the energy, slightly close that one. Because usually what happens is that when we have an influx of the energy and there's too many voices, it usually means that we have a chakra center that is too open. So I've been told that my crown is really, really, really quite open, which for somebody like me who is a high priestess and is constantly leading people through rituals, it's an asset to have that. But I don't always want that wide open because I have to be in the mundane world sometimes too. So just dialing it down. That was what one of my mentors had said. Just dial it down like a knob on the radio. We're just turning it down ever so slightly, and it actually can help sometimes. So that is something that I would try, and but also kind of set the intention, like, or not set the intention, but tell them one at a time, and I'll be able to address that. If anybody here too is somebody who picks up on a lot of energy from people outside as well, it's another technique you can do is just dial it down. A lot of times it's going to be your third eye or your crown. For people like us, we tend to be up here a lot. So it's usually not the lower ones we need to close, but a lot of times we do have to just dial the top ones down a bit. So something to try. As far as learning more about animal communication, I myself don't know a lot about it. I wouldn't consider it one of my specialties. What I have seen though is I've been to a couple of psychic fairs recently, and there's always an animal communicator there, and they oftentimes will teach classes there. So if you can find, I think you had mentioned you were going to some festival and then you missed the animal communication person. But if you can find another festival, we're coming into the summer, there's got to be tons going on everywhere. I bet you can find somebody who's going to teach a class on it and go, and you could take that and see if that helps. Another thing is that occasionally you'll see like the animal communicators, like there was one who would come to one of our it was called the not psychic guy, it was called Bodhi Tree Bookstore. And the animal communicator would come there and they were just doing readings. So that's another thing is just like once you get the name of a person like that who you know is doing that in your area, contact them and ask them if they can answer some questions for you. And then just kind of look too if you see any courses online or anybody doing stuff teaching about it. I think that would be a good place to start and see if you can learn a little bit about it, because it sounds like you actually have a really, really great gift at this. And so if you can utilize that and just amplify it, I'm sure you would love that so much. But definitely try to dial your your third eye or your crown down. You said you're going to one next weekend, yeah. So hopefully they'll have somebody there who's doing that kind of work. All right, so if anybody has any more questions, put them in here in the feed. It's so nice to see all of you. Coming up next week on May 10th, I am going to be doing a episode on connecting to spirit when we're feeling disconnected. So this episode isn't just for when you're feeling disconnected. I'm going to be sharing lots of like bite-sized practices that you can try to, but it's also a very good episode for anybody who's like having trouble connecting. If you can try a few of these practices, it can kind of jumpstart like jumpstarting the car. It can jumpstart kind of your spiritual, I don't know what the word would be, your spiritual body, I guess. So that episode is coming up on May 10th. On May 17th, I'm going to be doing an episode on dreams, and we are about to launch into a whole module on dreams in our Shadow Seekers membership. So I'm going to share a little bit at this episode, and then if you're interested in more, I definitely recommend joining us in Shadow Seekers, because on May 25th, I'm going to be doing a special shadow work ritual, and this ritual is going to be free. It's going to be on Thursday night. And this is going to be the opening of our Shadow Seekers membership. So we're going to be open for another week after that, and we're going to take in our next round of members. So anybody who is not a member will have a chance to join us. We have a great summer planned. We're going to be doing dream work. We're going to be doing past life astrology. We're going to work with the survival archetypes. We're going to tap into the heart chakra. So we have a lot of really good things coming, and we have Saturn about to turn retrograde in Pisces in June. So it is a great time to be doing shadow work. So if you are not a member and you would like a guide and a great community, we have an awesome community of people joining us, will probably benefit you a lot. So I'm going to be bringing more information about that and that special ritual that's coming up on the 25th. That's going to kick off our doors open after that. So more things are coming in the future. But I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you would like to get a ticket to Beltane, go ahead and get the link below here. We'd love to have you at our ritual on Friday. All right, until next time, take care and blessed be.